The Seahawks have a lot of fun players that I'm really excited to talk about, so let's just jump in. All right, we're going to start with Geno Smith, and I have intentionally not really talked about him that much on the channel so far, and that's because I don't really have that much of a take. I think there's kind of two sides to the argument on Geno Smith from Seahawks fans. One side says he's a bridge quarterback, and I get that. He is old, right? He's not probably going to be able to stick around for 5-6 years, right? He probably is going to be, declining within 3 or 4 years. And so you do need to be thinking about the future. And so if he is just a bridge quarterback, then he's not really that important to this team. This team shouldn't be trying to compete with him because he's just a bridge quarterback and we should be focusing on getting younger. I get where you're coming from. I also think on the other side, I think a lot of Hawks fans do think that he is a good enough quarterback to win a Super Bowl with. And I'm kind of see where they're coming from on that side as well, right? Yes, before he declines, before 3, 4, 5 years, whenever his decline happens, I do think the Seahawks can build a good enough roster. If these drafts keep stacking up as they have, Geno Smith could be the guy that takes us to the Super Bowl. I firmly believe that is the case. But also he could be just a bridge quarterback. And so I kind of think that a lot of the Geno conversation isn't really about Geno. I think if you like Geno Smith, you like him because he is a good quarterback. I don't think that is a debate. I think Geno Smith is a good quarterback. It's really just a matter of are the Seahawks going to be able to build a team around him to be able to make him a quarterback that is good enough to take us to the Super Bowl? And that's kind of the whole conversation around Geno. As far as what he actually does on the field, I think he's pretty good, right? He has, good pocket movement, a really strong arm, good accuracy down the field. I think for the most part, he is a good decision maker. I'm excited to see him in a different offense where we can really get some answers about okay, where did all of those, weird picks come from? Is that Geno not having the experience? Because he really isn't a very experienced quarterback. He's a veteran quarterback, but he's not very experienced because he's been a backup for so long. So I do think that Geno is just a really good player. I think his upside as far as where this team can go while Geno is here, that's the question mark to me. But I think it's kind of undeniable that Geno Smith is a good player, and I'm excited to watch him in Grubb's new system. I recently talked about K9, but let me reiterate, he is just a great running back. I'm so excited to see him in Ryan Grubb's new system, because I think it will accentuate his strengths, right? It's going to get him to the edge a lot more, where his speed and his creativity can really shine. I'm not a huge fan of K9 with between the tackles. I think that the Seahawks did a lot of that last year that just didn't really work, mostly because of this offensive line. If you're not giving the guy a hole between the tackles, there's just nothing he can do. There's very little, creativity that you can do to win in between the tackles. And K9 even showed some of that. I do disagree with the narrative that he's just this bounce happy running back. The interior of the Seahawks offensive line is so bad. And so I think that him avoiding that is just kind of logical. Firstly, his the run blocking is atrocious, and him bouncing it was really the only way to avoid a loss. But also he did a really good job of reading it out when it was there. There's so many clips where K9 does actually read out in between the tackles. I don't see him being this bounce happy guy. And I think a lot of Hawks fans, that's their critique of him, which is just very confusing to me. I feel like you're blaming the interior offensive line being bad on K9, right? His reaction to that makes a lot of sense, right? Him avoiding the interior of the offensive line because there's absolutely nothing going on in there, and he's just going to get tackled for a loss. I do think that K9 is a really good back. I think that he's probably going to open a lot of eyes this year, because if you get him to the edge more and you give him a little bit more space, and hopefully the run blocking is a little bit better, I think he can really be a force and show everybody that he is in that top 10, top 5 running back conversation, where I think he is. So I'm really excited to see K9 in 2024. Again, I'm going to say I'm excited to see him in the new system. I really am. I think this new system really accentuates K9's strengths. And so I'm excited to see what he puts on tape in 2024. I haven't really talked about Zach Charbonnet yet, and I just don't really know what to say. Let's talk about what we do know. We do know that he is a reliable short yardage back. I think he proved that in his rookie year. He's really good at just going straight upfield and making sure that he gets everything that is blocked out. And I do think on third down, he's someone you can trust in pass protection and as a check down receiver option. So I do like Zach Charbonnet. I just don't know if he's any more than that. And like that role is not really worth the second round pick that the Seahawks used on him. So I will be curious to see where he goes. I think that it's not really going to be a very equal split between these two guys. I think it really is going to be K9 is the workhorse back, and Charbonnet will come in relief. I could be wrong. Maybe Ryan Grubb has a different idea. I just think that K9 is a much better fit for how Ryan Grubb wants to run a lot on the outside and get everyone in space and get everything moving. I don't really see Zach Charbonnet being great for that. He's going to be more of the inside zone stuff. If you're trying to run on short yardage, I think Charbonnet is going to be good at that. I just don't really know where his upside lies. And to me, that's kind of the big question with Charbonnet is where is that upside? And hopefully we'll see. I think he proved that his baseline, he's going to be a good NFL player in the league. It's just where is that upside to, return value on the second round pick. But we'll see more of that in 2024. As we move on to the weapons here, let's start with DK. Of course, I think we all know that he's a great wide receiver. I think the biggest thing I have to say about DK is that he's kind of an illusion. He looks like Megatron, but he really isn't. Like, yes, he has the exceptional speed, the great releases, and he's solid after the catch, but his contested catch skills are just nowhere near what Megatron is. I'm not going to say he's bad at contested catches. He does have some good ones, but he's not really that guy that can adjust to the ball like all the great receivers can. In fact, I would say that like if I'm doing like who do I want to catch a jump ball, like right now it'd probably be like Jake Bobo or Tyler Lockett. I don't think DK is really in that conversation, which is wild because, he looks like the guy that you would want to catch every single jump ball. But he's just not really that good at adjusting to the ball. And it's not that his hands are bad, but they're not like these, what Tyler Lockett has. Honestly, like if DK and Tyler Lockett could just, become one wide receiver, they would be the best wide receiver of all time. Right? Because we have Lockett is just so good at everything that DK isn't, right? All the contested catch stuff, all the quicks, and then DK has everything that Lockett does. The size, honestly, is the biggest thing. So I do think that DK is just really good, right? He's an elite straight line speed wide receiver. I think he's going to be a focal point of this offense, and he's really going to unlock a lot of the stuff that Grubb wants to run, because if you just send DK on a clear out route, like they got to double team the guy. That's just how it works. His speed, his size, like you can't slow him down. I don't want this to be like a slight to DK. I would still have him as a top 12 wide receiver easily, and he's going to be a key piece to this offense. But we do need to stop thinking that he's Megatron, right? He's not this guy that's going to take over every single game. And so I do think that that's really going to be how Ryan Grubb uses him. Of course, yes, he is going to be, emphasized in the offense. He's just not going to be that guy that like the offense runs through DK. I don't think he's ever going to reach that point. I think he's going to be, still a very valuable piece, but not the guy that the offense runs through, if that makes sense. All right, let's move on to Tyler Lockett. I still think he's going to be a major part of this team, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Yes, he has transitioned to more of a possession receiver type role, and I do think his top end speed is probably declining, but he's still going to be that consistent presence that he always has been. Lockett is one of my favorite Seahawks of all time, so I'm glad he's back on the team. I think we all really know what he's going to be. He's going to be that guy that, Geno looks for on third down. Geno looks for in tight situations. He's just always consistent, and so that's what we all love about Lockett. I think he's going to keep being the same guy in 2024. So, it's going to be fun to watch. Again, another Tyler Lockett season is always a good thing. I'm excited to watch him even more and just see the complete player that he is continue to be brought out in the Seahawks offense. All right, now we get to a more difficult conversation. Jaxon Smith-Njigba. He really did struggle last year. I don't think that you could say that Jaxon Smith-Njigba was what we thought he was, honestly, or even what John Schneider probably thought he was drafting, right? He didn't look like a first-round wide receiver in year one. He looks like a good wide receiver, and he showed some flashes, but he really did struggle. And I mean, the injury definitely didn't help, right? I think a lot of his hands issues can be attributed to the injury. And I don't think the scheme was really helping him at all. I think it was honestly actively hurting him. But at the end of the day, he just wasn't what we expected. Yes, he did have those flashes of brilliance, but he lacked any consistency and really didn't become a major part of this offense. Like Jake Bobo and Jaxon Smith-Njigba were really used pretty similarly for your first round pick and an undrafted player, which is just a little bit confusing. And it doesn't really give Jaxon Smith-Njigba a lot of confidence going into this year. I will be curious to see how he plays in 2024. I think he's going to be used much better. But my only question is, where does the upside end? I do think we have seen the floor of Jaxon Smith-Njigba, and that was what he was last year, right? This guy that you can, he's a solid contested catch guy. He's a solid outside receiver, and he's a guy that you can trust to be a solid wide receiver. But that's not what you draft in the first round. I think he proved that he can, play on an NFL roster, but that's about it. So we need to see the upside of Jaxon Smith-Njigba. I believe in JSN, but at the end of the day, we do need him to prove it. All right, now we're on to Jake Bobo. And I mean, Jake Bobo is just so much fun to watch. The guy is everything you want from a football player. He is tough. He is clutch. He is really hardworking. And I think that Grubb is going to get him involved a lot more this year than he was even last year. I think he's going to be that guy, the first guy on if you're rotating your wide receivers, or the first guy to step up in case of injury. He really is that wide receiver 4. And I think that he's going to be really good in that role. I think he's one of the better wide receiver 4s in the league. Of course, we all know what he does as a blocker. He's just phenomenal. And I think that Ryan Grubb will use that side as well. But he's also just a really good X wide receiver. He has, the contested catch, like his contested catch abilities are fantastic and some of the best on the team already. I think his speed is underrated. Like everyone's like, oh, he ran a 4.99 or whatever it was. Like that is not an accurate, an inaccurate depiction of how fast he really is. He's not a speedster, but DeAndre Hopkins ran a 4.6 something. So like, I think he's more in that range, right? Where, if you're a good contested catch wide receiver, you really can carve out a role as an NFL player. So I think that's really more Jake Bobo's mold. He's not like this unprecedentedly slow wide receiver. That's just not really who he is. I think he's one of the most underrated Seahawks, and I'm excited to watch him in 2024. I think Grubb is going to, show us exactly how high his upside is. I think that's the biggest question that Bobo has to answer right now is, is he, of course, he is a good wide receiver 4 who could probably be a good wide receiver 3. But I'm curious to see if he could be a wide receiver 2. Probably not a wide receiver 1. That would be a bit of a projection. But I do think that he could be like a wide receiver 2 type player with his contested catch ability. And so I'm kind of interested to see if he can get to that level this year. I have an entire film breakdown on Charles Cross, so if you haven't watched it, go check that out. But I do think that he's a good player. He's solid enough as a run blocker, and he's solid in pass protection. He wasn't a liability for the Seahawks, but he certainly wasn't a strength, and that's kind of what you're hoping for when you draft a guy in the top 10. Again, I've said this before, but I think this year is about finding his upside. Yes, he is a starting caliber offensive lineman, but you hope that he's more than that. And so I think this year is going to really be about, can he develop to become that guy that you drafted in the top 10 of the draft a few years ago? I think he can reach his upside as a pass protector, but he really does need to refine his anchoring technique and his hand placement in order to get to where the Hawks want him to be. I think he can get there. I do believe in Charles Cross, but this year is going to be a little bit of a turning point for him in his career to see if he can become an elite offensive tackle or if he's just going to be a decent one. And so I'm excited to watch him. I think that the scheme is going to be pretty good for him. A lot of shotgun, which he was more used to in college, not a ton of drive blocking, but more the move blocking that he's better at. So I do think that this is going to be a good scheme fit, and I'm just excited to watch to see how high that upside truly is. This was a pretty simple signing, in my opinion. A cheap, short-term signing to provide a veteran presence along the offensive line. I think that's really what Tomlinson is. I think we hope that we're getting like the Niners version of him, who was a really good player, really good guard. Like he was one of the elite guards in the league when he signed that contract. I think getting him back into a more movement-based blocking scheme should help him. Hopefully just a change of scenery, getting out of New York should help anyone. But at the end of the day, I think he's going to be fine if he's asked to start. And I'm interested to see how all of that breaks down, if he is going to be a starter. I'll be curious. I think because Tomlinson is a left guard and Bradford and Haynes have traditionally been right guards. So if no one changes spots, I think he's going to be pretty uncontested for this job. And he's going to provide a pretty decent baseline. But I do think those three guys, as we break down later, those kind of are the three guys that are competing for the 2 guard spots. So I will be curious to see how all of that shakes out. I think that's going to really happen through training camp and through the preseason. So that'll definitely be something to monitor as we go along. I think Laken Tomlinson is going to be fine. I think that he's not going to be a liability for this team. I don't think he's going to be a strength. But providing a veteran presence and just kind of a floor to this offensive line makes a lot of sense. I'm glad he's here. And I'll be curious to see, if he can get back to those levels that he was at with the 49ers. This is another player that I have a full film breakdown on. At the end of the day, I also kind of think he'll be fine. His pass protection is actually pretty good. And I do think he will be serviceable as he was last year as a run blocker. I think there's an outside chance that Nick Harris might win this job. I don't think it's definitely going to happen. But Nick Harris has, he has competed for starting center jobs before. So I would be curious if he has any competition. I think Olu's tape was just better than Nick Harris. And I think that he also has a slightly higher upside, particularly as a pass protector. I think that Olu is just much better. So I'm rooting for Olu to win this job. I think that he's a very interesting player. I don't know if his upside is sky high, but I do think that for this year, Olu being your starting center, you can feel fine about that. I'm excited to watch him, to see maybe he does surprise a little bit and he's better than I think. I think he's ready to start in 2024. I don't know if he's going to be the long-term piece that you're like, oh, that's a franchise center. I don't know about that yet. But I am excited to see him start in 2024, and I think he's going to be good enough to not hold this offensive line back. For the right guard spot, let's start with Anthony Bradford. As a run blocker, I really do like what he does. You can question his movement skills to actually be able to get to the spots that he needs to, but his strength is just really amazing. But as a pass protector, it was really rough last year. He couldn't pick up a stunt to save his life and didn't really have the technique to be able to use all of that strength, to be able to stay in front of guys, mirror them back and forth, and anchor down. If he has taken steps to improve all of his technique, I think he could win this job. I don't really think that Christian Haynes is just going to walk in here and take it from him. I do kind of hope that that is what happens. I do think Christian Haynes has the higher upside, just because Christian Haynes is a better mover. But I do think that if Anthony Bradford has corrected a lot of his mistakes from last year, I do think that Anthony Bradford could win this job. And I would be very intrigued to see how that looks. But let's look at Christian Haynes now, because he is not really someone I'm going to show film. If you want to go watch some other film breakdowns, go ahead. He's a really fun player to watch. As a run blocker, he is a great mix of the athleticism and the strength that Grubb is looking for. I do think that his run blocking has a higher upside than what Bradford brings, because he does trade a little bit of that strength for just a tremendous amount of athleticism. And Grubb is going to love that. Grubb wants to get everyone moving. And I think that, this is the piece that really is like, okay, Grubb, you need a guard. Here's a guard for you that is just such a great mover. Pass protection, not really a strength for Haynes. It's not really like any spot that he's like terrible at. I just don't know if he's going to be able to translate quickly to the NFL. I think he probably will struggle a little bit in pass protection. I think that'll be worth it because he's going to be such a menace as a run blocker. So I am pulling for Haynes to win this job. He just is the higher upside athlete, and he's a better scheme fit in my opinion. If Bradford wins the job, maybe Haynes could push for the left guard spot, but we'll see. At the end of the day, I think Haynes is going to be the long-term right guard, probably. Maybe he switches over to left guard, but I think he's going to be a long-term piece on this team. It's just a question of if that is year 1 or if that is maybe year 2. So we'll see. I'm excited to watch him, particularly in the preseason. He's going to be someone I'm going to watch very closely. because I think he has a very high upside as a guard if he can fix his pass protection technique. Over to right tackle, we hope that Abe Lucas is going to be healthy. We don't know if he's going to be the week 1 starter. I think that the Hawks should probably just let him take his time because George Fant, who we will get into in a second, is here. And so I don't think that there's going to be this tremendous fall off and we need to rush back Abe Lucas. Last year was pretty rough once he came off of injury. He just had really bad anchor and just didn't look explosive at all. So you're hoping that he can kind of go back to what he was in his rookie year where he was a pretty good starter. I'm excited to see him get back to that and try to build off of that. I do think that that is a very likely outcome because, that last year was just completely destroyed by injuries. And so if he can get over those, I do think that he could get back on this trajectory towards being a franchise right tackle. His rookie season was really good, especially for a rookie. He just looked like a good right tackle from the jump. And so if he can build off of that, I would be really excited to see what Abe Lucas could bring. Again, it just all goes back to the injuries. If he can get over those and really push past them and start to build off of what he did in his rookie year, then I think Abe Lucas could return to being a franchise right tackle. All right, last but not least, we do have George Fant, and this signing was just logical. I think that he'll be solid enough as a starter if the Hawks need him, and that's exactly what you want from your swing tackle. The Hawks finally actually have a swing tackle who can pick up snaps in games and not be a huge detriment to the offense. Last year, having to have Stone Forsythe and Jake Curhan both start games is just not ideal, and having a player with starting experience is going to be great. I don't want to overhype him because he is an aging guy and he didn't get a starting gig for a reason, but I do think he'll be fine, which that's just more than enough, and it's going to be better than anything that the Hawks have had coming off the bench for quite a while. So I am excited for George Fant, kind of. I'm excited for what he means for this team, not really what he's going to bring, but just, having a third tackle that you can go to, and he's not going to completely ruin your offense and make you change your entire scheme. That's pretty important. So to me, that is what George Fant brings, and I'm really glad that he was signed to the Seahawks. I think he's going to be, good enough, which is more than fine. I think that this offense has the potential to be a top 10 to 12 unit. I really do. To me, the biggest question marks are the scheme and the offensive line. Ryan Grubb has no NFL experience. And while I do have a ton of faith in who he is as a coach and what he showed in college, that is still a question mark. And the offensive line is also another weakness. If those tackles can take the steps that we hope, this could be a pretty average offensive line, which, make no mistake, that would be a revelation here in Seattle, but I do think that the offensive line has some pretty big question marks if those tackles can't take the steps, because the downside of this offensive line, the floor of this offensive line, is pretty low. But you really can't deny the upside of this offense. These weapons are really good, and I think that the depth in the weaponry is also really good. Getting K9 to open up this offense, and I think Geno can absolutely operate this offense, I think this really could work. At the end of the day, I'm really excited to watch this scheme. JSN, Cross, and Lucas all being young players that you really want to see growth from. I think there's a lot of development that's going to happen in 2024. Even from a play caller's perspective, I think that Ryan Grubb is going to be developing how his scheme is going to look in the NFL. And this is just going to be a fun offense, so I can't wait to start diving into the tape. In the next video, I will be diving into the defensive roster. To make sure you don't miss that, please subscribe here on YouTube. You can also support me on Patreon with the link in the description. Your support is what allows me to continue to improve and expand what we do here, so I can't thank you enough. I will see you in the next video.